But the funny thing is you're in this place that's absolute darkness, but it's calm and it's peaceful, and you don't really feel alone. You feel like there's something else there. And because I had just died this violent death, this was an incredibly peaceful experience for me to be in this absolute darkness.
I'd like to welcome to the show, David Bennet. How you doing, David?
Very good, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, my friend. I'm excited to talk to you about your near-death experience, which is as unique as a snowflake as many of these other near-death experiences I've talked about, but they all do have a similar moments in them, without question.
Yeah, they're like themes almost. There's certain aspects, but the funny thing is within these experiences, you don't always. Not everybody has the same elements, they're all, because it's so unique and it's so individual. And I think that's part of the reason why so many people don't come out about their experience, because it's so personal. It took me a long time. It was 11 years before I spoke publicly about my experience.
Wow.
I tried to share it with a few friends. Didn't go well. And so I shut down and I kind of hid it, but it's something that lives with you every day.
Yeah. From what I understand, near-death experiences are very custom built for the experiencer. It is, if you believe in Jesus, sometimes Jesus shows up. If you believe in Buddha, Buddha shows up. If you believe in Krishna, Krishna shows up. Or your third grade science teacher, or it just weird different things that are very customizable to you. So it's definitely not one size fits all. But before we get into your near-death experience, what was your life like prior to you having this near-death experience?
Yeah, I was a very self-involved individual. I grew up being thrown in from one family to the next during my childhood. So you become very self-reliant in that. And you don't, and my belief, actually my philosophy at the time was you cut your swath through life. So that doesn't really include other people so much. Okay. And it's quite a brutal philosophy if you really think about it, because it's very one-sided. I did have the opportunity, though. My mother took me back in when I was 14. And we moved to Arizona. And at that time, I was hanging out with a lot of Native kids. And so their grandmothers kind of took me in and showed me kind of the natural way of living. And I was really attracted to that, and actually had my very first spiritual experience when I was 14 because of those. Well, it was kind of interesting. They had taught me to kind of seek my own vision quest. Okay. Mm-hmm. They had told me that would be a seed to my own growth and that sort of thing. And so I did, and I was successful after many attempts. And I had a vision quest where I went. It was rather odd, where it felt like I was going into the earth, but then I found myself floating above it. And then I settled down onto the actual plateau that I was sitting on, meditating on, and Grandfather Mountain came and spoke to me.
Mm-hmm. That must have been. And you weren't taking any mushrooms or peyote?
No peyote, no nothing. No, it was all natural. But it was many attempts before I actually had the deep experience. I had, experiences that was helping me quiet, but what the grandmothers taught me, and through this, their form of meditation, vision questing, I think it saved my life, because I was on a bad path. I was really on a bad path.
Well, did this start to turn the path a bit, turn the wheel?
I think it mellowed me out. It made me start focusing on what's really important in life. And so, so then I kind of got my act together, and I decided, I need to go somewhere with this life. I can't just be this, rabble rouser.
Now, were you religious or spiritual growing up?
No, because I was thrown from one family to the next. I got to see all these different religions and philosophies, and I didn't see where it really helped any of them. And so, so I didn't really adopt any religious view until these grandmothers kind of took me in, and I saw what, the benefit of having a connection to your spirit, having a connection to the earth, and so that quieted me down quite a bit. But then, you have to grow up, you have to get a job, you have to make a living, and so you kind of put that stuff aside, and that's what I became the chief engineer of a research vessel, and I still had that cut your swath through life philosophy, because I didn't really feel like anybody else was looking out for me. So I had to, I had to make my own way in the world.
Isn't that interesting though? Because, even as a young man, I was exposed to certain spiritual ideas, and they just sat in the back seat, and
Yep.
and the ego took over, and you just have to keep going, and you got to keep pushing. And until the passenger in the back seat starts to knock you in the head a little bit, you got really knocked in the head. I didn't.
Well, yeah. Yeah, that's a great analogy, though. It's sitting in the back seat. It's there, but but we're just not utilizing it. We're just not utilizing it, and
many times ignoring it, just purely.
Yeah, well, you're right, but our culture makes us think in that ego-driven kind of framework. That we have to get a job, we have to be successful, we have to compete, we have to, that's how we get along in this world. And I mean, that's the way it is today, still, that we, this is the way our culture teaches us, especially as males, to be. We have to, be out there. And so there's not a lot of room to have a deep spiritual connection in the culture in which we live in today.
The Western culture, especially the Western.
Yeah, in Western culture. Yes, in Western culture. I think in the Aboriginal cultures and stuff, I think you're going to find, that they include it with their daily life. And to me, that's fascinating that, oh my gosh, you can be spiritual and still live a life, still be successful, still be a part of this world, And so anyway. Yeah, but I didn't learn that until after I had the near-death experience.
So just take us to the night or the day that your near-death experience happened to you, my friend.
Early March in 1983, I was the chief engineer of a research vessel. We just completed a survey with this new ROV, an underwater vehicle, and and we were trying to come in to our home port, and there were 25, 30-foot seas, and the harbor master wouldn't let the ship in. So the captain decided that we were going to, because there were a number of engineers on board that were, attached to this ROV, and that they needed to get to LAX. And so they decided that they were going to put the Zodiac in the water, which is a rubber landing craft, you might say. And we use it for retrieving our submarines and stuff like that. So it was a very durable craft, really reliable. We weren't concerned about it at all. But they got in, and the captain decided that because we had a skeleton crew, because we were on evaluation, we weren't on an actual job, that I should probably go in the Zodiac with them, because I knew the harbor. We didn't have a real skilled deck crew on board that day. And so normally I don't get in. Normally I don't go on the Zodiac and shuttle people back and forth, because I'm in charge of the ship. I'm the chief engineer. So, but the captain thought this night would be probably prudent. So we went down Bosun's locker, got some really old life vests. They were the old Mae West ones, and we hadn't, because it was a rough night. We thought, well, maybe, most of the time we didn't wear life vests. We just, in those days,
it was the 80s. It was the 80s.
Yeah. And we just didn't bother. And so these were on board to meet Coast Guard requirements, but who the heck wore them, So we had to beat the dirt off them, put them on, jumped in the Zodiac, took our last bearing of where the harbor was, tried to see where the harbor buoy was, but we were 2 miles off, so you could just barely see now and then a flash of light from the harbor buoy. And it was a stormy night. I mean, it was really rough, and so we headed in, and so that was the beginning of the end in a lot of ways, because you can imagine 25, 30 foot, when you're a couple miles offshore, they're just rollers, right? They're just big rollers. And so we'd go on top of a swell, try to get a bearing on the harbor, ride the trough down up to the next swell, do the same thing again. But at the same time, you got to realize the harbor buoy is bouncing up and down too. So, are you in sync, And we lost track of the harbor buoy, but the shoreline was lit up. So we figured worst case, we're in a Zodiac. We can just do a beach landing. We'll get these guys into the harbor somehow, some way, and we'll get them on their way to the airport. And we were about a mile offshore when all of a sudden we actually drove off a breaker. And so we, we boom. And I yelled at the mate, turn us around, get us back, turn us around. I'm in the bow trying to see our way. And there was a mate that was on the console driving. And I yelled, turn us about, let's get back out. We're in a breaker zone. This is a dangerous place to be. And just then the next one came and it crashed down on top of us. And when it did, it folded the Zodiac in half like a peanut butter sandwich. And I was in the bow. It catapulted me into the sea. And I was just tumbled and tossed and totally lost all bearing as to what was up, down. But I trained as a commercial diver. I wasn't freaked out because I had good old Mae West on. She's going to carry me up to the surface. I just have to hang on and protect myself, And so I was doing that. And but you can only hold your breath so long. And eventually I drowned.
Wow. So you're in the water drowning and you're out. So what happens what happens next, David?
Well, it's really interesting. Drowning, and I've talked to other drowning experiencers. It's kind of I don't know. I don't know if we just gravitate to each other. Sometimes, the way the universe provides things like that. But and the other drowning near-death experiencers that I've talked to had very similar kind of result, that you breathe in the salt water, which is not a pleasant experience, but then immediately pop out of your body. And I found myself in an actual void, this darkness, absolute blackness. But there was no more roaring of the sea. You can imagine what 25-foot sea sounds like. It's horrendously loud.
I've been out there a couple of times. It's not fun.
Yeah, it's not fun. No, right? And so, and if you're on the West Coast, that the current comes down from the north, so that water is incredibly cold. That's why surfers on the California coast wear wetsuits, because it's just the water there is very, very cold. And this was March, so it was frigid water, but I'm not feeling cold anymore. The roar of the ocean isn't there anymore. I'm comfortable. It's quiet. It's calm. I'm in this absolute darkness. And so I'm really curious, like, what is going on? And it's kind of funny because, in diver training, we actually go through oxygen deprivation training and commercial diver training. And so, this is way beyond anything I'd experienced with oxygen deprivation. And so I'm curious. But the funny thing is you're in this place that's absolute darkness, but it's calm and it's peaceful. And you don't really feel alone. You feel like there's something else there. And because I had just died this violent death, this was an incredibly peaceful experience for me to be in this absolute darkness. I know some experiencers that go, research shows about the void that it's a terrifying place because you're alone, but you don't feel alone. That can be terrifying. But for me, it felt very peaceful. And then I saw a light, but it was just this pinprick. And I felt like I was moving toward it. And as I moved toward it, I started getting these waves and waves of love. It felt like I was being wrapped in this warm embrace. And so, I mean, I was in gaga awe of what was occurring. And I saw this light as I got closer and closer, was like millions upon millions of fragments of light. And they were all moving in unison. very much like sometimes you see large schools of fish, how they move together,
Mm-hmm.
and the light and the refraction. It was absolutely mesmerizing and spellbinding. But I got closer and closer, and as I got very close, three fragments broke away, and they were welcoming me home. Alex, let me tell you, it was the most emotional and life affirming event ever, because
Mm-hmm.
they were welcoming me home, and it felt like I was coming home.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a sense of home. We talked about, my early
Right.
life. I didn't really have a feeling of, and suddenly I have this sense of, here are these light beings that are welcoming me home. I look at myself and I realize I've turned into a fragment of light, one of these light beings. And eventually a dozen of them come greeting me. And I'm just feeling overwhelmed with the love and the support that they're embracing me with. And then they communicated to me that we need to go into the light. We went deeper into the light, into this area that to me, it felt very spherical, like a giant bubble. And we went inside and we started to relive my life. But I relived it not just from my perspective, but it was like my consciousness had fragmented into multiple streams of consciousness. And I experienced it from my point of view, but everyone I've ever interacted with from their points of view as well. And it was like every interaction I ever had would create a ripple, and these ripples would cascade out. And it was kind of interesting because I was a brash young man, like I said, and I wasn't real proud. I didn't want this soul family to see some of the stuff that I'd done. And so I was, it was hard for me. It was very difficult for me to because they were experiencing it exactly the same way I was experiencing it. But they were just supporting me and loving me through it, kind of giving me that extra support that I needed to get through this review of my life. But the interesting thing was I saw that when I would do something with just loving intention, when I did something in my life with loving intention, wasn't looking for anything, just out of just my heart to your heart type of intention, that created some of the biggest ripples. And that was, I was just amazed by that. And that the things that I thought were important in life, like becoming the chief engineer of a research vessel, all of these things that, were I held in high regard, or maybe my ego held in high regard, had very, very little in the effect of ripples, So I went through the life review, and I came to the point where I had drowned, but we kept going. And it was kind of interesting because in the life review, everything is so crystal clear, absolutely crystal clear, as far as all the interactions, the ripples, the different streams of consciousness. But when I crossed that threshold into what I didn't realize at the time was my future, it became like a corridor, like I was looking down this corridor, and it was clear in the center, but it was out of focus on both sides. And so it felt like I could go this way or I could go that way if I wanted to. And to me, it kind of represented a free will that we live in this life, that we have a choice, but we have a chosen path that we've picked, but we have this opportunity, our free will, to kind of venture off to one side or the other. But we'll come back to the center path. So anyway, we're going down the center path, and I start living or pre-living, events in my life, and I get to a certain point, and the light itself, all these millions of fragments of light in unison spoke and said, "This is not your time. You must return." And I said, "No way. I am not going back. I've got a family that loves me. I feel loved and support like I've never felt before. I have a family that I didn't even realize I have. and that body is broken. It's just cold meat in the ocean being tumbled and tossed. And I still had an awareness of that body. But the light spoke to me one more time and said, you must return. You have a purpose. And it did it with so much love, and that word purpose just resonated in my being. And when we're in that light, we have this expansive consciousness, so much more than what we have available to us in this physical life, that I understood what the purpose was. And so with that understanding, I immediately came to acceptance. And when I reached that threshold of acceptance, I found myself outside my body, observing my body in the ocean now, still being tumbled and tossed, because I'd gotten into one of the cyclic areas where the waves come in and it just constantly keeps you there, Mm-hmm. And so my body's still being ragdolled around in the ocean when part of the wreckage of the Zodiac, actually the bow line, wrapped itself around this arm, and it yanked my arm up, dislocated my shoulder, and I'm outside my body watching this going up. And the three soul family members that had greeted me were with me. And we all rose up together as my body got entangled in the wreckage of this Zodiac. And then more waves hit. And when they did, they slammed my body up against this wreckage, and some of that salt water came up. And that's when they gave me a gentle push and I came back into my body.
Wow. So the wreckage basically gave you a CPR push.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. There was a lot of things that were going on there that played with my mind for years afterwards. The thing that the bitter end of the bow line was tapping my lifeless chest. And I was sitting there and I was wondering, how is the enormity of me going to fit in there? In that physical body. And then, they gave me that gentle push to go in, but it was.
So but you're still in the ocean. You're still floating around.
Oh yeah. And we're still a mile out.
A mile out. So what happened to the other guys? What happened to the other guys?
They were the heroes of this whole story because they stayed on station. They rallied together. This is what we were trained to do is, as in this type of environment. This is what, we're trained to do. We're trained to look out for each other and to, we all come back together basically. Mm-hmm. And so, very militaristic type of mindset.
Sure.
And we were all ex-military. So we're all ex-Navy. So we all had the same training. So anyway, they had stayed on station. And this is a dangerous place to be. And they had stayed on station. They told me that they were there about between 15 to 18 minutes, they reckoned. One of them had held onto a flashlight. All the things that happened this night, but he had held on to this flashlight. And so they had all rallied around together and they were looking for me. They were calling my name. But when I came up and I finally expelled some salt water and took a breath of air, excuse me, you can only squeak and squawk after you've breathed in salt water. It wreaks havoc with your larynx. So I was trying to get their attention, trying to stay on the surface, trying to breathe, and they found me. And we all came together and we rallied around that wreckage because there was a little bit of air in one of the pontoons of the Zodiac. So we used that as our rally point and we swam a mile inshore. And I had a dislocated shoulder and a thumb, and I was having a hard time.
Did you swim? You were swimming, or did they pull you?
I was hanging on to the Zodiac and kicking. Okay. And trying to help, do my own thing. But I couldn't stay on the surface. I kept going down and I couldn't. But the funny thing is when we come back from one of these near-death experiences, spiritually transformative experience, you feel like you're half here and you're half there because that expansive consciousness is still with you. And I knew there was something wrong with my Mae West. And I unclasped the chest clasp on it. And I looked down and the lining of my Mae West was dry rotted and the fiber filling had become super saturated with water. And so it was actually pulling me down instead of bringing me up. And so I took that off, and then I could maintain some buoyancy and be able to hang on and just kick, hang on with one arm and kind of kick and scissor kick my way in with them. And we were all hanging on to these, one pontoon of the boat.
Now, you mentioned soul family. Did you see any faces? Did you know anybody? Was it like grandma? Was it like, who was it?
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. In the near-death experience, they were fragments of light, but I could see these eyes. These eyes were in the, and it was like that. I recognized them not from this life. They weren't like grandma or grandpa, because I didn't have that in this life. But I recognized them. I recognized them as a family, and we had this connection that I think was probably lifetimes, and so and I just started calling them my soul family, because they weren't anybody I'd lived this life with. Although 11 years later, I had a second NDE, and in that one, I got to live, the additional 11 years in a life review. And I got to see how much the first one had actually affected change in me. Because I didn't really think because I had hid it, I wasn't talking about it. I didn't really think it had changed me that much. But there were three things in my experience that really, really motivated me. And that was because of the life review, because of the love. And that I suddenly knew who I was. And so there was this acceptance of who I was. I knew I had a lot of work to do, because, because I needed to change. I saw in that life review how I really needed to change, but I could accept that this is who I am right here, right now, and I can do better. And then tolerance for other people. You remember my philosophy that cut your swath through life. Well, I didn't include tolerance for other people, but I suddenly I could see where other people have their path in life, just like I have my path. Sometimes we intersect, and sometimes we work together, and sometimes we may disagree, but that's okay. That's their choice, their life, their decisions. And we may not agree with them, but I could accept that is the life that they're living. Okay. It's a little innocuous, but it's, and then the third thing that really stuck with me was truth. I've always liked truth. It's always been important to me. But after the near-death experience, I realized that there's more than just the factual truth, the truth that we learn in school out of books and the things that we've lived in life. There's more than just factual truth. There's also a truth that resonates within our heart, within our being. And that when we come across these truths, they resonate, we see them, they illuminate within our life, And so I realized that that is the greater truth that we need to embrace. And so to follow, and that's kind of guidance in a lot of ways, to follow that inner truth. And so acceptance, tolerance, and truth, that became kind of a mantra for 11 years while I wasn't sharing it outwardly. In fact, if anything, I was hiding it, because the guys, they were like, Dave, we were looking for you a long time. And damn well you can't hold your breath that long. Where were you? And then all of a sudden you pop up, So, it's like, where were you? And so I said, Neptune spit me back and stuff like that. I would kind of hide it, because I tried to share it with my wife at the time, and it didn't go well. And so I thought, well, I can't talk about this. And the work that we were doing back in the 80s, commercial diving, underwater exploration, was incredibly dangerous. And so, death was a taboo subject. It just wasn't something that you would really talk about,
Right. Well, let me ask you, when you came back, did you have any issues with how did you process what had happened? Because there's one thing processing it on the other side, processing it on this side with the limited meat suit that we have and the thing between our ears is such a smaller version of this grand expanse that you were talking about. How did you just process it just psychologically?
Yeah, it is tough. It is tough, because you come back and you feel like you're dense. You feel heavy and dense, and because you're confined. And that expansive awareness, it diminishes very rapidly. I felt like I was half here, half there for about 3 days, but then it slowly diminished. And the things, it scared the heck out of me, Alex, because I suddenly was seeing auras. At the time, I didn't know what they were. I just called them life force energies or something. You know, it was like,
it was the 80s.
Yeah. And it was in Southern California. And we lived in this little apartment community that where all the apartments face each other, and there's a central courtyard, you know. But it was all gardened and it was terraced and it was beautiful, you know, but everything had this aura about it. And I was like, what the heck is this? You know, it was like, I must have really took a hell of a bonk on the head, because I'm seeing things, you know. And if I would look at somebody in the eyes, I would see the light in their eyes, just like the light fragments eyes. I could see the light that resided within a person. And it felt incredibly intrusive. And so I had a really hard time looking at people. And I was that guy that was always in your face, you know, kind of like. And so for me, suddenly not to be looking you in the eyes, because I just couldn't look you in the eyes, because I could see your being, your essence, who you were, you know. And so I wanted it all to go away. I just wanted it to go away. I want my old life back. I don't, whatever this is, I think I'm going nuts. I don't want to deal with this. Also, I started getting, not everybody has these after effects, but this is what happened to me. I started having these, they were at the time, you know, the 80s, I called them downloads. We were just, you know, I'd get this information. And it wasn't anything I'd learned in school. It wasn't anything that I had, you know, I had lived or anything like that. So I didn't know where this information was coming from. But it was this intense knowing that would just happen. And so I did what a good engineer would do. I tested it to see how, you know, veridical is this real? Is it something I can rely on? Is something I can use? And the more I tested, the more I found out how reliable it was. And so eventually, it's not an overnight thing. Integrating these experiences is not overnight. It takes time to kind of get used to it. Eventually, I was able to learn to just be able to shut down the seeing of the auras and people's life essence and that sort of thing. I was able to quiet that down so that it wasn't so disturbing. And I didn't have anybody to talk to, so I had to kind of, you know, I took that acceptance, tolerance, and truth, and I used that was my handhold. The rest of it, talking and arguing with what I perceived as God, I couldn't deal with that. I had to just push that aside. I had to like bury that in my subconscious. I like to say I put it in a shoebox, wrapped it up with duct tape, and wrote with a magic marker, "Do not touch," you know, and shoved it as far back in my brain as possible, because but I could accept the, you know, what I'd learned in the near death, in the life review and meeting my soul family. I could accept that to a certain degree. So I kind of hung on to acceptance, tolerance, and truth. And when I had my second experience 11 years later, I saw how much just that little bit that I had taken from the near death experience had changed me dramatically.
Well, let me ask you, what you said downloads. What kind of downloads are you talking about? Like, what kind of information was coming in?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Sometimes it was personal. Sometimes it was about maybe a coworker. I suddenly knew personal information about them. One time it was about, we were getting ready for another job, and I suddenly knew that I was going to have trouble with number 2 engine's reduction gears. And so I had stocked some parts that normally I don't stock, and they're very expensive. Fortunately, I was the chief engineer, and the captain's like, "What are you spending this money for?" And it's like, "Well, I just have a feeling we need to cover our bases, you know." And so we get offshore, we're on job, and suddenly number 2 reduction gear, you know, kind of craps out, but I have what I need on board to be able to repair it, you know. So that type of thing, you know, like suddenly I just would know something, you know. I didn't have any, you know, like there wasn't any indicators to tell me that reduction gear was about to fail, but I knew it. I just knew it.
That's fascinating. So, all right, so you've kind of hinted at this second near-death experience. Can you kind of go through that a little bit?
It wasn't so much a near-death experience as maybe a spiritually transformative experience, but what happened was I was meditating. I got to hang out with some amazing people in this spiritual community, and they were going back to Sedona, which is, where I lived just outside of Sedona. And so I thought, well, this is great. I get to go travel the old trails and hang out with these people, and I'll sit in on a few of their spiritual classes and things like that. But I planned on escaping more than sitting in with them. But the first day they were going to go do a meditation on Bell Rock, and I thought, oh, that's great. I love Bell Rock. It's a neat place. And so I went up to a place that was familiar to me. I sat down and I started to go into my sacred place, like the grandmothers had taught me. And just as I did that, because Sedona is one of those places where I feel like I can breathe, because it feels like home to me, because I lived there as a youth. And so as I sat down, I was so comfortable. I was so at home. And all of a sudden I heard that voice, the light, speak to me, and it told me to return to the light. And when I did, and just there was no choice in the matter, I suddenly found myself back in the ocean, drowning in the void, meeting my soul family again, having the life review. Only this time I got to see those 11 years that I had just lived. And
you had to go, wait, hold on. You had to go back through all of that to get back? Like it was like one way only? There was no side door you could walk into?
Yeah, right. It was like I didn't have a choice. I just suddenly went through and relived the entire near-death experience. Now, I've talked to some near-death researchers, and they said that, a lot of times when an experiencer represses their experience, that they may have a spiritual crisis at some point, and that it may bubble up. And this also happens, I understand, with childhood experiencers, because they're made to repress it. And then maybe in their 30s, 40s, 50s, I even know one in her 60s, suddenly it came up. It bubbled back up to the surface. And so I feel that's kind of what happened with me, because I had kept it close to my consciousness by adopting some of the experience, but trying to hide part of it, that it was only 11 years. And I finally went to a place where I was comfortable, and I was in that quiet place where I could hear very well, and was going into my sacred space. And that's where, boom, it came all flooding back.
All right. So you went back and you relived it. And then you saw in that your life review, when you get to life review, you saw 11 more years.
Yeah. Of living my life. And I saw how much it really, really changed me. So, it taught me that I need to adopt the entire experience. I need to just embrace the whole experience and start living by what I'd learned within this experience. So I started living by what I called my quiet ministry, that I was going to live by what I'd learned in this experience and just bring it into all aspects of my life.
So, and then through that spiritual experience, when you went back through that life review, what happened after that? Did you just come back to the body?
Yeah, but you would have thought I drowned, because I was the perspiration, I was soaking wet. You would have thought I just drowned. And I came walking down, and it's kind of funny. There on this retreat were a number of very well-known near-death experiencers, and so I had peers that could be mentors. And so, but I felt like I was half here, half there. It was very emotional time, because I really didn't get to participate in a lot of their adventures, because everything was alive, and it was hitting me emotionally. It's kind of interesting when you go into the light, you go into it. You don't bring your body with you. You don't bring your emotions so much as you have like a tether to your emotions. But when you're in the body and you have that same love affecting you, embracing you, our human emotions just get overwhelmed by it, And so immediately after the second experience, I had a real hard time just being in public, because I loved everybody. I love the table that I was sitting at. I love the
you were
chair.
High. You were
Yeah,
high.
it was,
You took
yeah,
you took
well,
some
but
ecstasy. You took some ecstasy, basically.
so yeah, so it was just it was very hard to be with people.
And so when did you decide to, during these 11 years, when did you decide to kind of come out of that spiritual closet and start talking about it?
Not till after the second experience.
Oh, really? So it was still all held in all this time. You were holding it. You were repressing it for quite some time.
Yeah, it was.
Oh, yeah.
But I had anyway. There was some reasoning behind it, because I really,
Sure.
you question it. You question it. We're human.
Of course.
And our ego gets in there and says, hey, I can be just as good as that experience, it's funny how our head plays with us, but these experiences feel more real than this life. The
Kind of
experience.
like a dream. And many times you wake up from dreams that felt so real because you were in a different place, and you wake up and you're like sometimes my wife will wake up and she'll hit me for something I did to her in a dream. I'm like, I didn't do anything. So, I swear to God, it was right there. You did this. Like, I did nothing. I was just sleeping.
Yeah, right. Well, I'll think of just the opposite now. Where you are right now, that's the dream.
Yeah.
This is the dream.
Yeah. This is what the Aborigines say. This is the great dream.
Yeah.
The great dream. This is not the reality. This is the simulation. This is the dream.
Mm-hmm.
This is the illusion that we're living, and we're going to wake up on the other side going, I was on this podcast. It was crazy. And then they're going to go, what's a podcast?
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's very interesting, because anyway, I had a thought, but I lost it.
But you finally started to come out, and did you, when you finally decided to start sharing this experience, how was the reception? Friends, family, so on.
Yeah. Really positive, because I've by this time in my life, I had changed my entire life had changed, because during that 11 years, there's integration that's going on, and there's this calling that comes out with people that you want to be more of service. So so I quit my life at sea. I began working, I started working in hospitals, in biomed, and then eventually in dialysis, and I just I felt like I could be of service more by living life with people, not being 500 miles offshore all the time. And so I had started interacting with more spiritual groups and interactions. So when I came out, that's kind of funny. I never thought of it that way, as coming out. But when I started sharing my experience, I had kind of found some mentors and some really good people that really supported me in it. And so I felt supported once I did start to share it.
Why do you think this happened to you, David?
That's an excellent question, and one that plagued me for many, many years. But that word purpose, and that's kind of why I wrote my book, was, Voyage of Purpose. The purpose, that there was a purpose behind me coming back. And I think it's part of why they kind of showed me some little previews, and I had to fulfill what the purpose was. And the big part was to prepare me for, in 2000, when I developed stage 4 lung and bone cancer. And the prognosis, I had lesions in my hip, my brain, my kidneys. It had eaten away 2.5 bones of my thoracic, and my spine had collapsed. And the prognosis was I only had 6 to 8 weeks to live. And part of my mind said, hey, you can go home, but the other part said, hey, remember the purpose. And I knew, because I saw in that life review, when I was living my future, I saw I was going to have the cancer. I also saw I was going to live beyond the cancer. And so the funny thing happens with people that have terminal disease prognosis. at first there's a fog, you know, this fog of what the heck is going on in my life. But then there's this clarity that you know what's important. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what you focus on, is what's important in your life, right? Well, with mine, I had that clarity, but also it brought me back in focus with my spiritual and my human life. And it kind of gave me this laser focus as to, you know, how to move forward. And my communication after my second experience became even more enriched, because my soul family were actually communicating with me. So I had this amazing guidance to guide me through the, you know, the tough period in life, which was stage 4 lung and bone cancer.
Well, that's very interesting, because you're the first near-death experiencer I've spoken to who was shown pieces of their future in a life review. You didn't cover that the first time we went through the story. So that's a very interesting part. You actually saw glimpses of these things. They're like, hey, you're gonna get cancer, but then we're not gonna do a spoiler alert on if you make it or not. But over here, you see yourself past it, so you make the decision of what happens.
Yeah, well, it gives you a leg up, that's for sure. I mean, I knew I was going to survive it, right? But which is a positive thing when you think about it.
Yeah,
Our attitude when we go into you know, illness and any kind of dis-ease, you might say, anything that is you know, a rock in our path, having the attitude of how you're going to overcome the obstacle is incredibly powerful, especially to our body, especially because our body has amazing healing qualities to it. And, you know, I've got a broken spine, 3.5 bones are missing in my spine. And the only thing holding it together is a massive tumor. You know, it's like, this is, you know,
rough.
the body normally, the body doesn't like this. But I was able to overcome it. And the really weird thing is I used a combination of traditional, and because by now I'm working in the hospital in dialysis. And so I was able to use traditional medicine and some holistic approaches. And by using my guidance kind of shared with me, you know, oh, try this, try that, you know, and this, oh, this feels right, this doesn't feel right, you know, that sort of thing. And within 6 months, I was cancer free.
And the doctors, of course, had no idea how that happened.
I love the phrase, not sure what you're doing, but whatever you do, just keep at it.
You know, I've heard that statement from doctors who have patients with miraculous healings go, I don't know what's going on, just keep doing it. And
Yep.
But you know, that's funny thing about doctors is, because I've had family members in the health field forever, and I have doctors in my family who it won't change them. They see an experience like yours and they'll be like, it's an anomaly. And they just don't dig deeper into it, and they still walk their path. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah. My oncologist was fairly progressive, and my family doctor, my primary care doctor at the time, was very interested. He wanted to know how I did it. He really did. I mean, he sat me down. We had just a standard, you know, physical, and we spent half the physical talking about my near-death experience and how it guided me through my cancer,
good.
you know.
Good.
And he thought he was amazed by it. That was my primary care doctor. Unfortunately, he got out of medicine, but anyway, but my oncologist was, he was very interested in the holistic approaches that I had combined with the traditional medicine, you know.
So you had some open-minded doctors, some progressive doctors.
Yeah. And that was kind of a neat thing, because I picked my healthcare team. But that's a very fortunate thing for me, because I was in the hospital.
Sure.
I was part of the system. And so I was able to, you know, kind of pick my healthcare team and to move forward. I think, but attitude, checking in with your guidance, those are all the things, you know. I had 4 friends that came down with terminal cancer diagnosis at the same time I did. We all worked in the same division. And one of them survived. The others didn't, because the minute they were diagnosed and I was talking to them, they said, "Oh, I just got my death notice."
It's done.
They were giving up.
Yeah.
And sure enough, they were gone within months. The way we perceive ourselves, if we give our body a chance, we can overcome a lot. We can overcome a lot if it's meant to be. If it's meant to be.
David, you've lived a very interesting life, to say the least. Why do you think that what is the biggest lesson you've learned in this lifetime? Why did you have to go through all of this in this incarnation?
Well, since the cancer and everything, I've started what I call a contemplative practice. It's meditation, but then once you reach that point of stillness, then you open up a conversation with the divine, basically. And in contemplation now, I'm able to share a lot of what I've learned. Also, since I was able to overcome the cancer, and I used a lot of my own going into the light and using the light as a guiding star, basically, to show me how to overcome my cancer and to use energy work as one of the now I can do that for other people. And so I learned how to help other people through energy work. I also do contemplative living podcasts and things like that. And I think that now I'm living more of my purpose now than I ever was. The cancer, though, really was a big role in that. It taught me so much on how to overcome the obstacles that we face in life. Because I've faced a number of obstacles.
A few, just to say the least. And I mean, would you agree that, that life happens for us, not to us?
With us. I would say with us. We're co-creators in our own lives. And we have the ability to, we have a lot. Because we have free will, we have a lot of choice in life. And if we choose to, we can sit down in our path. We can just sit down, relax, say, I'm not doing anything else. I'm not gonna co-create my life. I'm just gonna sit here in my path. But life's not gonna let you do that. It's not gonna let you do it. You may think you are, but it's not gonna let you, because the universe is gonna throw stuff at you. That's what living this life's all about. We all face challenges, but how we approach those challenges really, really determines who we really are.
Now, David, I'm going to ask you a few questions to ask all my guests, my friend.
Sure.
What is the definition of living a fulfilled life?
I think living a fulfilled life is being authentic, being true to yourself, trying to learn as much as you can about your higher nature, connecting to that higher nature, and then bringing it through and using it in all your interactions.
If you had the ability to go back to that young man and give him one piece of advice, what would that be?
Wow, that's a great question. I don't know. What would I tell him? Keep your head down. No.
Don't get on that buoy.
Don't get on that boat. As rough as my life was, there's not a lot that I would want to change. So I would just try to encourage him to stay in touch with what he'd learned from those grandmothers.
Okay. How do you define God?
You see, God to me is omnipresent. It's everywhere. It's a part of everything. It's within you. It's within me. So I see God as something so much greater than what our minds can even comprehend. So I see, God in the universe. I see God in the trees, in the dew, in the grass. I see God in all of that.
What is the ultimate purpose of life?
Oh, I think there's a shared purpose, I believe. And that's for all of us to be able to recognize our own divine nature.
Great answer, my friend. Now, where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing, sir?
The portal to everything Dave is is dharmatalks.com. Dharma, DHARMA, talks, TALKS.com. And but on YouTube, if if you're interested, I have a podcast on YouTube that's contemplative living, but it's on my YouTube channel, which is Dave's Dharma Talk. So those are the two that I would, or Instagram, Facebook, but if you go to my website, you can click on all the links to my,
to your stuff, to your work, the Dave's world.
The Dave's world, yes.
Dave's world. And do you have any parting messages for our audience, Dave?
Yeah, I would say the one thing that really stands out in this life for me is that, we don't have to go looking for God or the divine because it resides within each and every one of us. But the portal for us to find it and to bring it into our lives is to quiet ourselves enough to be able to hear it.
David, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and for the amazing work you're doing to help uplift and awaken people around the world, my friend. Thank you again so much.
Thank you for having me, Alex. It's been great. Been fun.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.